Hello everyone, welcome to my channel where I share true stories about infidelity. I'm a pilot, and through my work I've come across many surprising, emotional, and sometimes shocking stories of infidelity. Join me as we dive into these tales. Feel free to listen while you relax, unwind, or even before bed. First story. Looking back on my life, I realized that the best years were the years I lost. More than 10 years ago, I entered my first marriage with full hopes of a happy family. My ex-wife, a girl from a wealthy family, pampered since childhood, had a gentle beauty that I thought would bring warmth to our home. But the truth was quite the opposite. She was withdrawn, quiet, and never shared anything with me. It felt like we were not just two separate individuals, but two completely different worlds. I tried to build a connection with small actions, but my efforts always fell on deaf ears. The quiet evenings in the house that seemed warm and cozy became haunting. I came home after a tiring day at work, expecting a smile, a small talk, but instead, there was only coldness. She was not angry, did not blame, but her silence made me feel lonelier than ever. As time passed, I gradually realized that there was no longer love between us, but only duty. After many sleepless nights, I decided to divorce. I knew that this would not only affect my life, but also hurt my family. But I could not continue to live in a loveless, unsympathetic marriage. The day I went to court to resolve the proceedings, I felt relieved but also filled with regret. We divorced on our son's first birthday. While both families were celebrating our son's birthday, she and I stood in court, ending a sad chapter in our lives. That feeling, with everyone's laughter on one side and my own brokenness on the other, almost drove me crazy. After the divorce, I fell into a state of emptiness. My son, whom I loved the most, was given to my mother to raise. Every time I went to pick him up for a trip, seeing him cry for Dad when I brought him home, my heart felt like it was being squeezed. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat normally, and couldn't concentrate on work. The money I earned wasn't for living expenses, but for paying lawyers in a desperate attempt to regain custody of my son. I remember one evening after dropping my son off, I sat alone in the empty room. His cries still echoed in my head, and I felt like the worst failure. I thought that if I couldn't keep my family, at least I could keep my son with me. But after months of seeking help from lawyers, I realized that I had no chance. Fortunately, an old lawyer friend stopped me from making the wrong decision. He advised me to stop, accept the fact that my child needed both a father and a mother, and that litigation would only hurt him more. His words were like a life buoy, helping me escape the depths of despair. Although painful, I decided to let go and focus on being a father in the best way I could. The next 2 years were a time of healing and rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work, finding small joys to ease the pain. The times I took my child out and saw his smile gave me the strength to move on. But no matter how hard I tried, I still felt empty inside. At night, lying alone, I often wondered if I had made a mistake in choosing the path of divorce. I could not erase the image of my son that day, looking at me with bewildered eyes as if asking, "Why did you leave me?" I know that life is never easy, and the most important decisions often leave scars that never heal. But I also know that I cannot let the past haunt me. I need to move on, not only for myself, but for my son. After 2 years of trying, I slowly rebuilt my life. Although my job was not very favorable, it was enough to help me make ends meet and save a little for my son. I learned to enjoy the small pleasures, a cup of coffee in the morning, a favorite book, or picking up my son on the weekends. Although the pain from my first marriage was still there, I began to feel things starting to fall into place. It was during this time that I came across the airline girl. It was a service complaint where I had no idea that a small incident would lead to a life-changing relationship. She, with her confident appearance and professional demeanor, immediately caught my attention. Not only did she resolve my issue quickly, but she also made me feel heard and respected. We kept in touch after that meeting. At first it was just business messages, but gradually the conversations became more personal. I discovered that behind her strong exterior, she also had her own dark corners and pain. The similarities in our situations made it easy for us to empathize and share with each other. Our relationship gradually deepened. She often visited my house after work, bringing me delicious food or helping me clean the house. At times like that, my empty house seemed to become more cozy. She did not hesitate to teach me how to dress, communicate, and even how to take care of customers, things I did not know I needed to learn. Gradually, I began to think that maybe she was the missing piece I had been looking for, a woman who could bring balance and motivation to my life. I thought of the prospect of a new family, where I could start over and make amends with myself. But then one evening, everything came crashing down. She left her tablet at my house, and while I was sleeping, the constant buzz of messages woke me up. I didn't intend to read it, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, opened it, and what I saw shocked me. Unacceptable text messages flashed before my eyes. One of them was a conversation with my ex, where she openly invited him to participate in acts that I would rather not repeat. The words and intentions in them completely shattered the image of the woman I once respected and loved. I couldn't believe my eyes. I put the phone down, trying to convince myself that I had misunderstood, but the truth was undeniable. After taking a shower, I went back to look at the messages more closely. Each line was like a knife stabbing into my heart, completely destroying the trust one had placed in her. The pain was not only in the content of the messages, but also in the fact that she had lied to me, someone who had experienced too much pain in love. In the days that followed, I was in a state of panic. Work was neglected, relationships with friends and partners gradually fell apart. I couldn't concentrate on anything, because my mind was filled with images and words from those messages. I tried to face her, but every time I saw her, I felt anger and disappointment welling up. Our relationship ended quickly. She admitted that what I saw was true, and she had no intention of making excuses. She said that her past could not be changed, and she did not think I would find out. Although her words seemed sincere, it did not ease my pain. After the breakup, I fell into a new spiral of depression. I began to wonder if I had made a mistake in trusting someone again. Was it me who always made the wrong choices? Or was there simply no room for happiness in this life? After ending my relationship with the airline girl, I struggled to find peace in my daily life. Work, my son, and small pleasures like surfing social media gradually became my main source of comfort. Those days, I didn't think about starting a new relationship. 2 failures, 2 betrayals made me feel like I didn't have the courage to trust anyone else. However, the long, lonely nights in the quiet room often led me to wander online. Dating apps, which were initially just a pastime to kill time, gradually became a place where I spent more time. Among the countless profiles that I scrolled through, one profile stopped me. It was of a high school teacher, independent in a small town, who loved books and art. Her photo was not too flashy, simply a gentle smile and a few sincere lines of introduction. With a simple swipe of a screen, I began a conversation that would change my life. The initial messages were about general topics, reading interests, work, and things that both of us found interesting. But as the days went by, the conversations became deeper. She told me about the hardships of being a small-town teacher, the funny stories of her students, and the joy of watching them grow. I also shared about my son, about the simple happiness of picking him up on weekends. She not only listened, but also sympathized and gave me profound thoughts that surprised me. Through each message, I realized that she is not only a strong and independent woman, but also an understanding and delicate person. The messages gradually became an indispensable part of my day. Every morning, when I woke up, I would see a few lines she sent me the night before, telling me about an interesting test my students had done, a good book, or simply a picture of the sunrise from the window. At noon, in between work, I would send her simple pictures of my meals, or tell her small stories about my day. She is not the type to brag, but every time she shares about her work or life, I feel her passion and dedication. Those things warm my heart, as if I have found a new source of light in my life. After a few months of texting, we decided to meet in person. The meeting took place at a small cafe in the town where she was teaching, a place she had mentioned in her messages. She appeared casual, without elaborate makeup, but exuded a naturalness that made me feel comfortable. Our conversation, even though it was in person, was not much different from what we had exchanged via text. She was as sincere and open as ever, making me feel like I was talking to a close friend rather than a stranger I had just met. We spent the afternoon getting to know each other, and when I left, I felt a sense of relief, as if I had just entered a new door in my life. As time passed, our relationship gradually became deeper. She not only brought me a sense of peace, but also made me feel the value of companionship in life. Although I could not completely erase the pain from the past, I realized that I wanted to seize this opportunity, wanted to keep her in my life. I decided to propose marriage. Before doing so, I spent many nights thinking, wondering if I was being too hasty. But then, the feeling that this relationship was right made me not hesitate anymore. I also shared with her about the things I could not accept, the wounds from the past that I had not yet completely overcome. I told her that I did not need to know about the past, but that the present and the future should be reserved for our family. She agreed, showing understanding and willingness to step into a new journey with me. Life after marriage went more smoothly than I expected. She was not only a caring wife, but also a responsible companion. She helped me organize my work, manage my finances, and encouraged me to try new projects. Her presence made me feel like I had finally found a solid support system. However, family life is not always smooth. Although we try to share and support each other, sometimes I still notice small gaps that I cannot fully understand. She does not often express her feelings, and there are times when I feel that there is still an invisible wall between us. After a while of getting married, I started to notice something unusual. She would often avoid me when I brought up sensitive topics or react harshly in small arguments. She was not as enthusiastic in our relationship as before, which made me wonder if there was something she was hiding. Despite the discomfort, I told myself that these were just the small difficulties of married life. But those things still haunted me, like a seed of doubt that I could not completely erase. Our married life was not much different from what I had imagined. I went to work, she continued her teaching job, and we both raised my son like a normal family. But deep down, I still couldn't completely deny the feelings of insecurity. There were moments when I felt that there was an invisible distance between us, as if she was keeping something from me. One morning, when she forgot to charge her phone and asked me to plug it in, I picked up the phone. The screen lit up with notifications from messaging apps and social media. I'm not the type to pry or invade privacy, but this time, a strange urge made me swipe open the screen. At first, I saw only casual conversations with friends and colleagues. But as I scrolled through, a few unfamiliar names caught my attention. One of them was a group chat with messages full of emojis and statements I didn't expect from my wife. They were joking about past relationships, unforgettable times, and even comments about me. I scrolled down, each line revealing things I didn't want to know. A text from her to her best friend, talking about how she had been looking for relationships before meeting me, with such bland words as if it were obvious. She even mentioned that she hadn't been serious when she first met me, that she just wanted to try it out. What shocked me the most was a string of text messages between her and her ex-boyfriend. Nothing explicit, but enough to stir up memories she had tried to hide. In one section, they talked wistfully about old memories and laughed about things I didn't want to imagine. Those words seemed to add fuel to my long-standing suspicions. I couldn't understand why, after all we had built together, she still kept in touch with people from the past. The messages from her close friends were also full of negative words about me, as if I was just a temporary option in her eyes. Holding the phone in my hand, I felt everything around me collapse. The image of my ideal wife, the person I once trusted, the person I thought would accompany me for the rest of my life, suddenly became a stranger. I remembered the times she reacted coldly in our conversations, the times she showed reluctance in the relationship, and realized that I had deliberately ignored the clear signals. I put the phone down on the table and sat in silence for a long time. My mind was filled with unanswered questions. What did she really think of me? Did she really want to keep this family? And what would I do when faced with this truth? In the days that followed, I didn't say anything to her, but the silence between us became more obvious than ever. I wanted to ask her directly, to know why she kept these things in her life. But I was afraid that if I spoke up, everything would fall apart completely. I told myself that I needed time to think, but the hurt in my heart kept growing. She didn't notice the change in me, or perhaps she deliberately ignored it. She continued her daily work as if nothing had happened, but every time she left the room, I felt like I was living with a complete stranger. My son, even though he was still young, began to sense the tension between the two adults. One night, as I was putting him to bed, he asked why his parents were smiling less these days. The innocent question left me choking, not knowing how to respond. I realized that, no matter how hard I tried to keep it to myself, I couldn't hide the change in the family atmosphere. After discovering the unwanted things on my wife's phone, I fell into a state of endless conflict. Every night, I lay in bed, watching her sleep beside me, wondering if what I saw was truly a reflection of her, or just a part of the past that she had not yet fully let go of. I wanted to confront her, to ask her about the messages, but I was afraid that if I did, my family would fall apart. What would happen to my son if his parents were no longer together? But was it better to remain silent? These questions haunted me every day, not leaving me alone for a second. In the days that followed, my relationship with my wife became quietly strained. I no longer laughed or talked to her like before. She noticed the change, but did not ask. Perhaps she thought I was busy, or that there was something else besides work that was tiring me. She continued her daily chores as usual, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the children. But those actions no longer brought me the same warm feeling as before. I couldn't help but wonder if what she was doing was sincere, or just maintaining a responsibility that she felt was necessary. One weekend night, after putting my son to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at her phone on the table. My mind was in turmoil. I knew I couldn't continue living in this silence forever. If I didn't face it, the doubts in my heart would continue to erode the relationship and myself. When she emerged from the bathroom, I decided to talk. There was no anger or criticism in my voice, just a deep weariness. I recounted what I had seen, every message, every line, and the sense of betrayal they had brought. She was speechless as I spoke. Her eyes oscillated between surprise, confusion, and hurt. She acknowledged that the messages were real, that they were part of her past that she had not erased. But she insisted that what I had read was not her present, and did not reflect her feelings toward her family. She explained that the messages with her friends and exes were just random conversations that didn't mean anything special. She also said that the fact that I read them without asking her first made her feel like her privacy was being invaded. There was no anger in her words, just quiet disappointment. That conversation did not yield any clear answers. Despite her attempts to explain, I could not fully believe her. The images and words in the messages continued to haunt me, preventing me from seeing her as the ideal wife I had believed she was. I realized that the problem was not only with her, but also with me. The pain from my previous 2 relationships had made me a suspicious and untrusting person. No matter what she did, I could not let go of the negative feelings I was carrying. After many days of thinking, I realized that I had to make a decision. Continue living in this relationship, or step out to find peace for myself. But either choice comes with pain. If I continue, I will have to learn to forgive and trust again. This will not be easy, but if I succeed, It could save my family and bring stability to my son. If I give up, I will lose the person I once loved and the family I have tried to build. After many sleepless nights, I realized that I could no longer live in the tension between the past and the present. Each choice, whether to stay or to leave, did not bring a perfect solution. But I did not want to be a victim of my own life, of the pain that others had caused. For the first time in many days, I felt that I needed to change my approach to the problem. I decided not to focus on trying to fix my marriage or try to keep my family together. Instead, I would focus on myself. I would confront my wife, not to criticize or demand, but to plan a different future. A future that was not bound by the feeling of having to keep things the same. One weekend morning, I sat my wife down for a frank talk. There was no anger, no accusations. I simply shared my thoughts. I said that our relationship had changed, not because of a text or a conversation, but because of the way we were treating each other. We were no longer companions, no longer speaking a common language, but two people trying to maintain a facade. I suggested that we temporarily live apart so that we could each have space to think about what we really wanted. I didn't use the words divorce or break up because that wasn't my intention. I just wanted us both to be honest with our feelings and figure out whether we still wanted to be together. My wife was silent for a long time after hearing what I said. She didn't cry or object. She just nodded in agreement. We both agreed that she would temporarily move back to live with her family, and I would stay in the house with our son. We kept in touch to make sure our son wasn't affected, but other than that, we didn't interfere in each other's personal lives. It wasn't easy. At first, I felt lost, but over time, I began to enjoy the freedom of my mind. I spent more time alone, tried new things I hadn't done before, like taking yoga classes, reading books on psychology, and even traveling alone. These experiences helped me realize that my life was worth living, with or without a family. My wife also went through big changes. She started participating in social activities, traveling with friends, and discovering hobbies she had forgotten. One time, when I brought my son to visit her, I saw that she smiled more, and her eyes were no longer as tired as before. I realized that the separation not only helped me find myself again, but also gave her the opportunity to look back at her life. After a few months of living apart, we decided to meet again to talk about the future. The conversation didn't go as I had imagined. There was no resentment or blame, just two people sitting across from each other, looking straight at each other, and talking frankly about their feelings. We both realized that, although we still had feelings for each other, our relationship had reached a point where we could not go back to the way it was before. We agreed that continuing to live together would only prolong the pain and suffering. But instead of divorcing in bitterness, we chose to remain friends, raising our son together and supporting each other in the necessary ways. Life after that was not easy, but it was a relief. I no longer had to force myself to live in a mold or a standard set by society. I continued working, spent more time with my son, and occasionally met with my wife to discuss child rearing. We are no longer married, but we are still an important part of each other's lives. I am not looking for a new relationship, but focusing on building the life I really want. As for her, she lives freely in her own way, but always maintains a close connection with her son. Next story. When I think back to the early days of our marriage, it is always filled with light and laughter. I met him at a business conference where he walked in with confidence and poise. It didn't take long for us to be drawn to each other. He was the ideal man in the eyes of many women, calm, thoughtful, and always knew how to make others feel safe. After only a few months of dating, he proposed. At that time, I did not think I could refuse. Not only did he love me, but he also showed affection for my family, even being as close to my parents as his own son. In the eyes of friends and relatives, we were a perfect couple. After we got married, our lives seemed to enter a period of desirable stability. In the first 2 years, I gave birth to 2 daughters, intelligent and lovely children. He took good care of me during each pregnancy, from regular checkups to cooking for himself to ensure I was in the best health. My friends often tease me that I am lucky to have a handsome husband who is both successful in his career and loves his wife and children wholeheartedly. He has never made me worry about finances because he runs his own business and always makes sure that the family has everything. Despite his busy schedule, he always made time to come home early, play with the kids, and help me with chores. He often said that family was his top priority and that I, along with my 2 daughters, meant everything to him. Those words made me feel secure, believing that I was living a beautiful dream. Our peaceful life began to have small ripples when he talked about financial problems at work. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, he sat down across from me with a serious face. He said that his business was in trouble and there were some procedures that required flexibility in his personal profile. He suggested that we get a divorce on paper, just as a formality to solve the work problem. At first, I was shocked. The thought of divorce, even on paper, made me feel uneasy. I asked him if there was any other way, but he insisted that this was the only solution. He assured me that this would not affect our relationship. He still loved me and the children, and we would continue to live as a normal family. His words, along with my absolute trust in him, made me agree. I told myself that this was just a temporary phase and things would soon return to normal. We went to court quietly, without any of our family or friends knowing. That day, I held the divorce certificate in my hand with a heavy heart, but he held my hand and promised that everything would be okay. As time passed, everything seemed to be stable as he had promised. We continued to live under the same roof, take care of our children, and maintain our family life as if nothing had changed. He still went to work, came home on time, and showed no signs of anything unusual. I trust him so much that I never thought to check his phone, email, or any documents related to his work. To me, he is the ideal man, who always puts his family first. But even so, there were small changes that I couldn't help but notice. He started spending more time on work, often missing family dinners or weekends. When I asked, he just said that work was going through a difficult period, requiring more focus. I felt sad, but told myself that I shouldn't bother him when he was trying for the family. The little doubts were gradually pushed away by my trust and love for him. Things started to get weirder when I noticed that he often received strange calls late at night. He always went out to take them, and when he came back, he acted calm as if nothing had happened. I asked him, He said it was a client or partner who needed to talk urgently. As time went on, the calls became more frequent. He also changed his dress code, becoming more presentable at work, even on days when he didn't have any important meetings. I told myself that maybe he just wanted to improve his personal image at work. But what bothered me the most was one time when he accidentally left his phone at home. The phone kept receiving text message notifications, and I couldn't help but notice. However, I didn't open it because I thought it was an unnecessary invasion of privacy. My heart still told me to trust him, but another part of me started to worry. After we filed for divorce, I tried to keep things as normal as possible. But as the days went by, I felt more and more that something was wrong. Little details, seemingly meaningless, began to pile up into a vague picture that I couldn't understand. He became busier with calls, texts, and unexpected business trips. Yet he still fulfilled his family responsibilities, picking up the kids, attending parent-teacher conferences, and making time for dinner with us when he could. But the contradiction in his attitude, both close and distant, made me uneasy. One weekend morning, while taking my two daughters to my grandparents' house, I happened to meet an old family friend. After a few small talk, she suddenly asked me a question that made me confused. "Have you heard? My husband has a 4-year-old son." I laughed, pretending not to understand what she was saying. But when I got home, that sentence kept ringing in my head. I felt like my insides were being twisted. If this was true, why didn't I know? Which son? How could he have a child without me knowing? That evening, when he returned home from work, I decided to ask him directly. At first, he was surprised and denied everything. But when I told him clearly what I had heard, he could not hide it any longer. He admitted that he had a son with another woman. He explained that it was the result of a fall when I was too busy with work and neglected sex. His explanation left me stunned. Just once? How could just once lead to a child? Why had he said nothing all this time? I felt like I was standing on an iceberg, where most of the truth was still hidden beneath the surface. Unable to bear the ambiguity, I decided to try to contact the woman he had mentioned. After much probing, I found her phone number. At first, she was hesitant, but after I assured her that I only wanted to know the truth, she agreed to meet. The meeting took place in a small coffee shop. She appeared calm, but her eyes were filled with worry. She recounted that he had told her that we had divorced because of differences in opinions. When she expressed her doubts, he even showed her the divorce certificate, the paper that we had signed with the reason for work. I sat silently, trying to absorb every word she said. She said that after he convinced her, they started a serious relationship, and the child was born not long after. But when she asked him to make their relationship public, he started avoiding her. She was also unhappy that he only visited their son a few times a month, not fully taking responsibility as a father. Her story was like a knife cutting into my heart. What I once believed, what I once considered solid, now turned out to be just a facade hiding a dark truth. He had deceived not only me, but also her, the woman who had unwittingly become the victim of a dishonest relationship. When I got home, I didn't say anything to him, but I had made a decision in my heart. I couldn't continue living like this, in a marriage full of lies and concealment. However, I also knew that I couldn't act hastily. My 2 daughters needed a stable family, and I didn't want them to suffer. In the following days, I began to pay more attention to his behavior. He maintained a normal appearance, but every time he left the house in a hurry or received a secret call, I felt a simmering anger flare up inside me. I realized that he had not only deceived me once, but that this betrayal could have been going on for years without my knowing. I started checking his phone and bank account history. Through suspicious transactions, I discovered that he had been providing regular financial support for his mother and child, and had even bought expensive gifts for his stepson without telling me. This was like a blow to my self-esteem. In the days that followed, after discovering a series of undeniable evidence, I decided to stop avoiding it. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, I waited for him in the living room. He walked in with a slightly surprised expression, but immediately realized that something was wrong from the look in my eyes. Not giving him a chance to distract me, I laid out before him the evidence I had collected: text messages, bank statements, and the woman's story. At this point, he could no longer deny it. He bowed his head and admitted that he was wrong. He admitted that he had taken advantage of my trust, not only to get things done, but also to continue a relationship that he knew was wrong. He begged for forgiveness, saying that things were over with that woman, that he only wanted to fulfill his responsibility to his stepson, but still loved this family. Listening to his excuses, I no longer felt the sadness I had before, but instead a surge of anger. Not only had I been betrayed by the person I trusted the most, but I had also been blatantly used. The divorce papers, which I had signed thinking it was to help him with his work, had turned out to be a tool for him to legitimize his lies to others. I didn't yell, nor did I scold him. I just looked at him and said, "You have destroyed everything we had built together." He was silent, unable to argue, just sat there like a loser. After the encounter, I decided to meet the woman again. Although I knew she was also a victim, I wanted to hear more about their relationship. This conversation brought me mixed feelings. She told me that he had promised to leave his family to be with her, but after having a child, he started to avoid her and only provided financial support without actually taking care of the son. She did not try to justify herself, but admitted that she was wrong to interfere in our marriage. However, she also said that if it were not for his lies, she would never have gone so far. Her words made me realize that, not only me, but she was also a victim of the same man. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere at home became suffocating. He tried to mend the relationship, to care more for me and the children, but his concern only made me feel more suffocated, as if he were trying to cover up a wound he knew he could not heal. My 2 daughters, even though they were young, began to notice the changes in the family. They asked why Mom and Dad didn't smile as much as they used to, and why Dad was absent more often. Their questions hurt me, but I couldn't answer them. I knew I had to make a decision soon, before things got worse. After many days of thinking, I decided that I could not continue living in a relationship like this. I needed to clear things up, not only for me, but also for the future of my children. I informed him that I wanted to separate, so that we could both have time to think about the future. He objected, saying that he didn't want to lose his family. that he would do anything to make up for his mistakes. But this time I didn't back down. I told him that if he really wanted to save his family, he had to prove it with actions, not just words. After he moved out, I started to focus on myself. I spent more time taking care of the children, participating in social activities, and rediscovering the hobbies I had forgotten. At first, it was difficult. Evenings alone at home, without him talking or laughing with the children, made me feel empty. But over time, I realized that I could live well without relying on anyone else. During the separation, he tried to prove that he really wanted to change. He completely cut off contact with the other woman, spent more time with the children, and started attending family counseling. But no matter how hard he tried, I could not forget the hurt he had caused. But I don't hate him anymore. I realize that he's just a human being with mistakes and weaknesses. But that doesn't mean I have to accept him back into my life. After he moved out, I entered a new chapter of my life. Being independent wasn't easy, especially when I had to manage everything around the house, take care of my children, and try to hold down a job. Although it was difficult, I felt relieved that I no longer had to deal with lies or internal conflicts. At first, the children were confused by the change. They often asked why Dad wasn't home, and I just told them he was busy with work. I didn't want to hurt them with the truth, but I didn't want to create any illusions either. Gradually, they adapted to their new life, and I realized that stability and love were the most important things I could give them. After years of putting my family first, I finally had time to think about myself. I started taking yoga classes, reading inspirational books, and even taking a soft skills course. These activities not only helped me relieve stress, but also made me feel like I was doing something meaningful for myself. In conversations with friends, I realized that I had changed. Before, I was always the one who gave in, trying to avoid conflict to keep the peace. But now, I am not afraid to speak my mind and feelings. This confidence does not come from revenge or resentment, but from understanding that my worth does not depend on anyone else. During this time, he tried to maintain his relationship with the children. He visited them often, took them out, and tried to make up for what he had missed before. I did not stop him because I knew that even though we were no longer husband and wife, he was still a good father to the children. However, between him and me, things were no longer the same. Every time we met, I always kept my distance, avoiding overly personal conversations. He, although trying to fix things, seemed to understand that there were things that were broken and could not be repaired. Although I have regained balance in my life, I still face many challenges. One day, when I was taking my children to school, I overheard gossip from other parents. They were talking about my separation and some not-so-nice rumors about my husband. These gossips made me feel uncomfortable, but I did not let them affect my mood. Instead, I choose to stay silent and focus on what is more important, my future and my children's. I understand that society always has a harsh view of women like me, but that does not define me. A few months after my separation, I received an invitation to attend a seminar on independent women and personal development. At first, I thought I was just attending to learn, but gradually, I realized that I had more to share than I thought. My stories, from dealing with betrayal to my journey of self-discovery, touched many people. The conference was not only a place for me to express my thoughts, but also a milestone that marked a change in me. For the first time in many years, I felt truly strong and capable of overcoming anything. After a year of separation, he expressed his desire to get back together. He admitted that the time apart had made him realize the value of family and the mistakes he had made. He said that if I gave him a chance, he would spend the rest of his life making up for it. I thought a lot about that offer. I knew that a part of me still loved him, but I couldn't deny that his betrayal had left indelible scars. After many nights of deliberation, I decided that love wasn't enough to save everything. I wanted to move on with my life, but this time as an independent woman, unfettered by the past. After deciding not to get back together with him, I felt like I had just put down a huge burden. No longer tied down by the past, I began to focus on more important things: my daughter, my job, and my forgotten dreams. Every day, I woke up with a small list of things to do. From simple things like planting a small flower pot in front of the house to learning a new recipe that I've always wanted to try. These little things, seemingly meaningless, become a source of inspiration for me to start the day in a lighter mood. I also spent more time with my two daughters. They no longer felt as confused as before and began to get used to their parents living separately. I realized that as long as I was stable, my children would have a foundation to develop stronger and more confident. Evenings reading books together or doing small crafts together became precious moments that I always cherish. After attending the workshop, I was invited to be a consultant for a project supporting independent women in business. At first, I was a bit hesitant because I never thought that I could become a mentor for others. But after a few sessions, I realized that my life experience is my greatest asset. I share my story with other women, not for pity or admiration, but to let them know that they can overcome difficulties too. This project is not just a job, but also a healing journey for me. Seeing other women regain their confidence and success, I feel like I am moving further on the path to freedom. My two daughters, though still young, have begun to show their distinct personalities. The older one loves to draw and spends hours creating in her little notebook. The younger one is active, curious, and adventurous. I realized that to nurture this potential, I needed to give them not only love, but also the freedom to explore themselves. On weekends, instead of staying home, I take my children to visit new places, a small museum, flower field, or simply a park near home. I want them to understand that even though their family is no longer the same, they are always loved and have a colorful life. Even though we are no longer husband and wife, he still visits the children regularly. I do not stop him because I know that his presence is necessary for them. But every time I see him, I cannot help but feel an unbridgeable distance. Once, he offered to help me financially to support my children's education, but I refused. I wanted to do everything myself, not because of pride, but because I knew that this was the best way for me to maintain my self-respect. He seemed surprised, but did not force me. At a community event, I ran into another man. He was an event organizer and had also been through a broken marriage. His story of rebuilding his life after a traumatic event resonated with We didn't rush into anything, didn't try to do anything other than talk and get to know each other. Each small encounter gradually became a joy in my busy days. He did not promise anything, and I did not expect anything, but his presence, understanding, and gentleness helped me realize that perhaps a new chapter in my life was waiting for me ahead. As time passed, I realized that I was no longer haunted by the past. The pain and torment gave way to peace and acceptance. I don't need to be perfect, nor do I need a perfect family to feel happy. I just need simple moments with my children and the belief that whatever the future holds, I am strong enough to face it. Next story. Our group resembled a close-knit family. 3 couples, each embodying their unique personalities, yet harmoniously intertwined. We all resided in the same serene neighborhood, where the joyful laughter of children echoed between the homes in the afternoon. Together, we celebrated significant milestones, birthday parties, adventures, and even grand holidays that brought the entire group together. My wife is a vibrant force of nature, effortlessly forging connections with everyone she meets. Her passion for planning shines through in everything from delightful backyard barbecues to exciting trips that our entire circle eagerly anticipates. She embodies not just the role of a devoted partner, but also serves as a vital thread in the fabric of our close-knit community of friends. My closest companion is a person I have cherished since my very first days in college. We were classmates, navigating the initial challenges of life and celebrating the little victories of landing our first jobs together. He has consistently been my source of encouragement during difficult times, and I believe our bond is unbreakable. When we exchanged our vows, our bond deepened in ways we had only dreamed of. We often laughed, realizing that we were not just best friends, but our families had also become intertwined in friendship. He was blessed with a gentle wife, a true embodiment of kindness and grace. Each time I witnessed the love and care they shared, my heart swelled with gratitude for having such treasured friends in my life. Weekend gatherings are a cherished tradition for our group. We take turns hosting, with each family adding their unique touch to a delightful dinner. The children frolic in the yard while we come together, exchanging stories that range from work to family life. That sense of connection and tranquility is truly irreplaceable. Family trips deepen our connection. From camping in the mountains to vacations by the sea, we have created cherished memories together. I recall the time we pitched our tent in the rain, and despite the challenges, we all found joy in our awkward yet heartfelt attempts. My wife and the women in our circle share a remarkable connection. They embark on shopping adventures, participate in morning yoga sessions, and exchange heartfelt stories that often surprise me. At times, I find myself pondering whether the confidences they share encompass concerns or vulnerabilities regarding their husbands. Yet, I firmly believe that these bonds only serve to fortify our group. In my heart, life feels like a beautiful masterpiece. I have a wife whom I cherish and trust, friends I hold in high regard, and a community where I truly belong. I always believed that nothing could shatter this connection, for it is woven from trust, honesty, and countless cherished memories. It all began with subtle shifts, nuances that I once overlooked. My wife grew increasingly engaged in casual gatherings with friends. She frequently mentioned the need to talk about travel arrangements or coordinate group activities. The explanations seemed valid, and I had no cause to question them. However, I observed that she appeared to dedicate increasing amounts of time to these meetings. There were days when she returned home later than usual or offered reasons that she required additional time to arrange her work. Initially, I believed she was simply striving to excel in her role as a connector, as she always had. She began to embrace her phone with a newfound sense of awareness. In the past, it would rest carelessly on the table or be misplaced around the house, often unnoticed. Now it accompanies her everywhere, even during her brief moments in the kitchen or the bathroom. Each time a message arrives, she swiftly locks the screen, as if guarding a precious secret from my view. One tranquil evening, I found her nestled on the sofa, gazing at her phone with a gentle smile gracing her lips. When I inquired about her activity, she swiftly responded that she was simply enjoying a humorous message from her circle of friends. Her reply seemed plausible, yet the smile lingered, igniting a spark of curiosity within me. I reminded myself, however, that perhaps I was merely overanalyzing the moment. I started to observe a transformation in her interactions with my best friend. At gatherings, they would frequently engage in conversations that lasted longer than expected, occasionally sharing glances that left me puzzled. On one occasion, I witnessed her erupt in laughter at one of his jokes, while the rest of the group merely smiled. I attempted to brush aside the thought, convincing myself that it was merely a natural bond between the two of them. Yet, as time unfolded, their connection became increasingly evident. They frequently sat near one another during meetings, and on occasion, I observed them exiting the room simultaneously, crafting excuses to grab drinks or engage in a brief task. One evening, as I inquired about her busyness, she revealed that her friends were organizing an extraordinary trip. She expressed the excitement that filled the air, and her desire to ensure every detail was flawless. The sincerity in her voice resonated deeply, and I felt it was important to honor her feelings without casting any doubt. However, when I gazed into her eyes, a sense of unease washed over me. Her gaze seemed to evade mine, as if she were concealing a secret. I chose not to press further, yet within me, a growing discomfort began to take root. Once, while we were shopping together, I noticed she received a text message. She glanced at her phone and mentioned that she needed to grab something from another department and would return shortly. I didn't think much of it and continued browsing. However, when I happened to glance over, I saw her engaged in a phone conversation. Her demeanor was quite serious, and as I drew closer, she quickly ended the call, claiming it was merely a work-related matter. When I inquired about her profession, she offered a brief response and swiftly shifted the conversation. Despite her seemingly relaxed demeanor, I could feel the underlying tension in her reply. I began to reflect deeply on these changes. As I lay in bed at night, gazing at the ceiling, I sought to unravel the puzzle within my mind. Was she concealing something from me, or was I merely being overly sensitive? I hesitated to jeopardize our relationship by posing baseless questions, yet I could not dismiss the disquieting sensation in my heart. I reflected on our children, on the joy and connections I had treasured. I reassured myself that maybe it was merely a misunderstanding, that our bonds remained strong. Yet, as time passed, the subtle hints grew increasingly hard to overlook. Despite my efforts to reassure myself that all was well, my confidence started to falter. Each time I witnessed her engaging in conversation with her best friend, an unfamiliar wave of jealousy washed over me. I hesitated to confront that emotion, fearing that if I posed the wrong questions, I might shatter the delicate balance of our connection. But I also understand that if I remain silent, I will never discover tranquility. The subtle signals I attempt to overlook are now transforming into a simmering tempest poised to erupt. I'm not one to jump to conclusions, yet the subtle shifts in my wife's demeanor caught my attention. With each gathering, I found myself observing more intently how she engaged with my closest friend. While nothing overtly inappropriate occurred, the comfort they shared felt distinct. Their glances lingered a bit longer, and their smiles carried a significance that eluded my understanding. At a gathering in the home of another couple, I noticed them huddled in the corner of the kitchen, engaged in conversation. As I entered the room, their dialogue abruptly ceased, as if they feared my presence would unveil a secret. They greeted me with smiles, yet those smiles offered no comfort. In the meetings that followed, I started to observe a fascinating pattern. They frequently exited the room together. Their explanations were ordinary, fetching more drinks, answering a phone call, or assisting the host with tidying up. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of harmony in their movements. Upon their return, they appeared more at ease, as if they had exchanged a hidden understanding known only to them. One time, as they exited the room together, I observed them. They stepped into the backyard and engaged in conversation under the soft glow of twilight. Though I couldn't catch their words, their proximity felt more intimate than it ought to have been. I turned back to the table, sensing a tempest rising within me. One evening, after a delightful gathering, we were making our way home. My wife appeared more contemplative than usual. I inquired about her thoughts, and she simply smiled, mentioning that she felt a bit weary. Yet, I couldn't help but notice the distant gaze in her eyes, as if she were pondering something far beyond our immediate surroundings. Upon arriving home, she swiftly embraced the warmth of a shower before retreating to her bed. I lingered in the living room, my gaze fixed on my phone, contemplating whether to delve into her messages. Yet, I hesitated, for the thought of uncovering something unsettling filled me with uncertainty about how to proceed. One day, as my wife enjoyed a refreshing shower, her phone began to ring. I looked at the screen and saw the name of my best friend. A wave of emotions surged within me, a blend of anger and apprehension. Why was he reaching out at this moment? What urgent matter required their conversation to take precedence over our next group meeting? When my wife emerged from the bathroom, I inquired about the call. She mentioned he was merely asking about the arrangements for the upcoming gathering. That seemed plausible, yet the way she averted her gaze made it difficult to accept. I made the choice to begin monitoring my wife's schedule. I observed that there were ambiguous gaps throughout her day. She would mention needing to put in extra hours or meeting friends to organize group plans. Yet, when I inquired more specifically, her responses tended to be unclear. One evening, When she mentioned her plans to meet friends, I made the choice to follow her. I maintained a careful distance to remain unseen, yet my heart raced with every mile we traveled. When she came to a halt in front of a quaint restaurant on the town's edge, I felt as though my heart might cease to beat. I parked a little way off and waited with anticipation. Moments later, I spotted my best friend entering the restaurant. They settled in together, engaged in a conversation that flowed effortlessly. From afar, they appeared as two friends enjoying a chat, yet I understood that their bond ran deeper than that. I remained outside, doing nothing but sitting there, overwhelmed by the sensation that the world had turned away from me. As they exited the restaurant, I discreetly captured a few photographs. I was uncertain of their purpose, yet deep down, I understood that this was merely the start of a challenging journey ahead. After trailing my wife to the restaurant and witnessing her greet my best friend, an unsettling suspicion took root in my mind. Each night, I found myself restless, wrestling with the fragments of events and peculiar behaviors I had once dismissed. Every minor detail now appeared as a crucial element in a hazy and alarming tableau. I yearned to dismiss what my instincts were whispering, yet I could not turn a blind eye to the truth that loomed before me. Each morning, as I watched her nurture the children, her smile radiating as if the world around us was untouched by turmoil, I felt like an outsider in my own family. This sensation was not merely one of sorrow. It was intertwined with a deep-seated anger, for I was lost, unsure of how to escape this relentless cycle. In the days that unfolded, I found myself observing her habits with greater intensity. She clutched her phone closer than ever, ensuring it was never left in sight. Messages frequently prompted her to exit the room in haste, and each time she re-entered, her demeanor shifted, as if she had just engaged in a significant dialogue that she wished to keep hidden from the world. Her excursions beyond the home, whether to connect with friends or to fulfill her work commitments, grew increasingly regular. There appeared to be unexplained voids in her timetable that puzzled me. I found myself questioning if I was losing my grip, or if there was a deeper mystery that awaited my discovery. One evening, I found her perched on the sofa, her phone cradled in her hand, her gaze fixed intently on the screen. Her face reflected a captivating blend of joy and tension, a sight I had never encountered before. After she set the phone aside, she remained in quiet contemplation for a moment, as if lost in thoughts that stretched far beyond the present. Once, I caught a glimpse of her speaking in her office. Her voice was gentle and somewhat muffled, yet it was clear she was striving to maintain the confidentiality of the conversation. As I stepped into the room, she silenced her phone, and an extraordinary stillness enveloped the space. I came to the profound understanding that I could no longer dwell in this realm of uncertainty. I craved the truth, a solid foundation of evidence to either affirm or challenge my emotions. With the support of a friend in the legal field, I reached out to a private investigator. This choice weighed heavily on my heart, for I understood that once the truth emerged, there would be no returning to the person I once was. The detective swiftly set out to trace her movements. The initial reports caused my heart to plummet. My wife was frequently rendezvousing with my closest friend in hidden locations, from a quaint eatery on the outskirts of town to to a transient apartment I had never known existed. Each fragment of evidence collected only reinforced the painful truth that the betrayal was far more than a mere doubt in my thoughts. One evening, she expressed a desire to step out and connect with friends. I trailed behind her silently, maintaining a respectful distance to remain unseen. Instead of heading to the familiar spot, she paused in front of a quaint hotel nestled in the suburbs. I parked the car a little way off, quietly watching from the shadows. Minutes later, I watched as my best friend entered the hotel. There was an ease between them, a familiarity that struck me deeply, and in that instant, I realized that the situation had spiraled beyond control. I chose not to go inside, not to confront them. Instead, I remained in the car, engulfed by a wave of pain and anger. A few days later, the detective shared with me clearer images of them departing the apartment, hand in hand. These images pierced my heart like a knife. I attempted to deny the truth, convincing myself that it was all just a misunderstanding. But now there was no escaping the reality. Their connection was not merely sympathy or confusion. It was a profound and intentional betrayal that spanned time. I held onto those pictures on my phone, gazing at them each night before drifting off to sleep. Not out of a desire to inflict pain upon myself, but rather to grant myself the space to embrace the reality that the life I once cherished had transformed entirely. I understood that silence could not be my companion for eternity. The evidence I held brought forth a mix of anguish and a flicker of tranquility, for I possessed the truth. I started to ready myself for the moment of confrontation, not to engage in conflict or cast blame. My sole desire was to uncover the reasons and the journey that led us to this point. I may not have clarity on my next steps, but I am certain that after this experience, my life will be transformed forever. After collecting ample evidence from the detective, I found myself compelled to confront my wife. In the days leading up to that moment, I endeavored to remain composed, concealing my turmoil. The children continued to play as they always did, and my wife wore a mask of normalcy. Yet beneath the surface, everything simmered like a volcano poised to explode. I felt not only the sting of betrayal, but also the fire of anger, directed not just at her, but at myself for failing to see the truth sooner. I carefully sifted through the photographs and the detective reports, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. Uncertainty loomed over my ability to remain composed, yet deep down, I understood that the truth must emerge, even if it meant shattering everything in its path. One evening, after the children had drifted off to sleep, I found myself in the living room, anticipating her arrival. She entered, weariness etched on her face from a long day, yet that no longer mattered to me. I remained silent, simply laying the photos on the table for her to discover. Her gaze shifted from astonishment to trepidation, and ultimately to desolation. She didn't refute it. The look on her face conveyed everything. The stillness in the room was so profound that I struggled to catch my breath. She bowed her head, her eyes avoiding mine, as if she understood that no number of justifications could alter the reality. She acknowledged that the bond between her and my best friend had endured for many months. It all began with what appeared to be innocent conversations, exchanging thoughts about life's challenges and family struggles. Slowly, compassion blossomed into desire, and they found themselves unable to resist. She didn't seek to blame or justify. She simply expressed her confusion about how we arrived at this moment. Her admission didn't ease my burden, it intensified the ache within me. All that I had ever held dear, all that I had ever fought for, lay in ruins, shattered by choices she could never undo. After a heartfelt conversation with my wife, I realized it was time to face my best friend. I invited him to my home, keeping the reason a secret. As he entered and caught sight of me alongside the photos on the table, he understood that there was no escaping the truth. He didn't deny it, not for a moment. He lowered his head, remaining silent for a few minutes before he began to speak of nebulous reasons, like loneliness and the solace he discovered in my wife. He claimed he never intended to hurt me, yet those words only fueled my anger. How could he utter such things when he was fully aware that his actions had shattered everything? I chose not to let anger consume me, nor did I raise my voice. Instead, I felt a profound emptiness. As I looked at my best friend, the one I once regarded as a brother, now transformed into a stranger, I understood that nothing could salvage this bond. The news of the incident swiftly found its way to his wife. She reached out to me, her voice a blend of anger and sorrow. She expressed her feelings of betrayal, not just by her husband, but also by the woman she had once held dear as her best friend. Tears flowed as she revealed that this was not the first time her husband had strayed, yet his betrayal of my wife was a wound she could not bear to forgive. That call opened my eyes to the truth that I was not alone in my pain. Each member of my circle of friends, who had once been my second family, was now ensnared in a whirlwind of betrayal and heartache. I chose to convene one final gathering, inviting all the couples in the group. I felt it was essential to reveal everything, for the truth demanded to be shared. As I recounted the story, an overwhelming hush enveloped the room. Shock, anger, and disappointment permeated the atmosphere. Some individuals attempted to share words of solace, yet deep down, I understood that no one could truly heal fractured bonds. My best friend's wife exited the gathering, tears cascading down her cheeks. Other couples departed silently, as if they sensed that this would be the final occasion our circle of friends would unite. After that meeting, I felt as though everything in my life had vanished. The home, once alive with laughter, had transformed into mere cold walls. My wife reached out to me, but I was unable to absorb another word from her. I understood that there was no turning back. Every morning, I seek to cultivate tranquility within my heart, yet the shadows of pain and anger continue to linger. The path ahead remains uncertain, but one truth resonates deeply within me. Everything has transformed for eternity. After a challenging confrontation with my wife and my closest friend, I came to understand that my life had transformed completely. Yet, that was just the beginning. The circle of friends we had cherished as a second family started to unravel. The news of the affair between my wife and my best friend traveled quicker than I could have imagined. The others in our group found it impossible to remain silent, and one by one, each couple began to drift away. Each gathering, once a cherished tradition, now comprised only a handful of individuals exchanging words. The hushed tones, the sidelong glances, and the palpable tension in every meeting made it clear to me that this circle of friends would never return to its former self. One of the most powerful responses emerged from my best friend's wife. She, whom I once regarded as a dear companion, now felt a deep sense of betrayal, not only from her husband, but also from my wife, someone she had once held in high regard. During our conversation, she revealed that this was not the first instance of her husband's straying. However, the reality that he had selected my wife from our tight-knit group of friends was a wound she could not heal. She could no longer conceal her anger, not just directed at her husband, but also aimed at me for not recognizing it earlier and allowing circumstances to escalate to this moment. Her feelings were a blend of anguish, disillusionment, and a sense of betrayal. Other couples in the group started to reveal their unease too. Though they didn't voice it directly, their demeanor in the following meetings shifted. What had previously been playful exchanges transformed into cautious dialogues, as if individuals were apprehensive that any words spoken could exacerbate the situation. One of the couples, once vibrant and engaging, slowly began to withdraw from our shared experiences. I came to understand that this shift was not only impacting me, but also prompting everyone in the group to reevaluate our bonds and trust in one another. When I made the choice to gather all the couples for one final meeting, I understood that this would be our last moment together. I felt compelled to lay everything bare, for I recognized that the truth must come to light, even if it risked shattering everything we had built. That evening, the room was enveloped in a profound silence. I spread all the evidence across the table, sharing the events that had unfolded and the emotions that stirred within me. The others remained quiet for what felt like an eternity. Their eyes reflected a tapestry of shock, anger, and disappointment. My best friend's wife exited the room first, tears cascading down her cheeks. Another couple rose, expressing their need for time to reflect on the events that had unfolded. At last, my wife and I found ourselves alone. Silence enveloped the room, creating an unyielding barrier. After that meeting, our circle of friends faded into the past. Each couple embarked on their own journey, creating a distance that lingered like a shadow. Bonds that were once woven with trust transformed into mere echoes of what they used to be. My wife made an effort to maintain connections with certain individuals, yet the majority chose to distance themselves from this incident. I too find it challenging to be in their presence any longer. Each encounter brings back memories of that moment, leaving me with a sense of betrayal. In the days that followed, my life seemed to lack purpose. With no more gatherings, no more family trips, I came to understand that my circle of friends had played a more significant role in my life than I had ever realized. Now, with everything vanished, I found myself facing a void that felt insurmountable. My wife made efforts to mend our relationship, yet I struggled to uncover a reason to forgive. The weight of betrayal, not only from her but from a circle of individuals I once held dear, was a burden I found impossible to release. Every night, I reflect on whether there was something I could have done differently to avert this breakup. I ponder the signs I overlooked, the moments when I hesitated to act. Yet, no matter how deeply I contemplate, I cannot alter the reality that it has come to an end. After our last gathering, our circle of friends found itself in turmoil. Once a close-knit community, each family withdrew into their own world, shunning the memories we once cherished. The weekend reunions, a cherished part of our customs, faded away. The joyful laughter of children was silenced, and the lively chatter around the dinner table became a distant echo. It felt as though everything we had created had been dismantled in an instant. Others in the group, while not directly entangled in the incident, experienced its rippling effects. Doubts began to creep in as they questioned one another, pondering if hidden truths lay beneath the surface. Bonds that once thrived on trust now appeared delicate and exposed. Some couples found themselves in conflict, not due to their involvement in the betrayal, but because the incident illuminated the fragility of their own connections, revealing that their relationships were not as resilient as they had believed. My wife made an effort to connect with other couples, yet the exchanges felt increasingly shallow. No one wished to be entangled in the aftermath of the affair, but the memory lingered in the air. The vibrant discussions that once flowed freely had dwindled to brief replies and strained smiles. The warmth and closeness we once shared had vanished entirely. I found it increasingly difficult to sustain connections with the rest of the group. Each encounter brought forth a wave of haunting memories, reminders of the moments when my trust had been shattered. What was once a source of joy had transformed into a well of sorrow. My dearest friend, whom I once regarded as a brother, departed from our neighborhood. He found himself unable to confront the repercussions of his choices. Those in his circle, who were once his closest companions, turned away, no longer wishing to see or speak with him. He transformed into an outcast, a presence that everyone preferred to sidestep in conversation. I received a letter from him, where he sought to explain and express his remorse for what had transpired. Yet, those words offered me no solace. The letter merely served as a reminder of the hurt and fury I had experienced. I chose not to respond, nor did I hold on to the letter. I discarded it as a means to liberate myself from the haunting memories. My home, once a vibrant tapestry woven with laughter and joy, now stands in quiet solitude. Each time I step into the living room, I am transported back to those cherished evenings with friends, where laughter danced through the air. Now those memories linger like ethereal whispers, gently reminding me of what has slipped away. My wife and I coexist like two distant souls beneath the same roof. Each morning, we cross paths, yet silence envelopes us. She makes attempts to spark conversations, but I find myself unable to reply. Every word she utters serves as a reminder of the betrayal, deepening my belief that this relationship has lost its value. Our children may not grasp the full picture, yet they feel the shift around them. They wonder why we no longer gather with other families, why our group adventures have faded away. I find myself at a loss for words. All I can say is that sometimes adults require space to navigate their challenges, and it's important for them to know that this is not their doing. I witness the gaze in my children's eyes each time they turn to me, as if they are seeking to comprehend why our family has transformed. It fills me with a sense of guilt, yet I find myself at a loss for how to mend it. The fractures in our bond impact not just me and my wife, but also the innocent souls of our children. Eventually, I realized that I could no longer continue living in this way. The silence, the isolation, and the haunting memories became overwhelming. I made the courageous choice to move out, leaving behind the home we had created together. I understood that a fresh start was essential, not only for my own well-being, but for the sake of my children as well. My departure is not an escape, but a liberation. I can no longer thrive in a space where every shadow whispers of betrayal and loss. While I understand that the journey ahead may be challenging, I am convinced it is essential to seek tranquility. After departing from my old home and my once cherished circle of friends, I slowly began to sense that I had liberated myself from a toxic atmosphere. Yet, the journey did not conclude there. A while later, I received a call from my best friend's wife. She mentioned that there were certain matters she believed I should be aware of. Despite my reservations, I consented to meet her at a quaint coffee shop. She shared that this was not the first instance of her husband's infidelity. He had engaged in relationships with other women, including someone from our circle of friends. This revelation left me astounded. It became clear that the betrayal was not an isolated incident, but rather a pattern of actions that had persisted for years. I understood that it was not only my heart that had been wounded. Others in the group had also suffered from shattered trust. These revelations inspired me to convene one final meeting, not to seek reconciliation, but to unveil the complete truth. I extended an invitation to all members of the group, including those who had withdrawn after the last event. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. I did not mince words. I presented everything I knew before everyone, from the connection between my wife and my best friend to the secrets his wife had disclosed. The revelation cast a shadow over the group, igniting a whirlwind of emotions. Many confessed that they had sensed something amiss in his actions, yet fear silenced their voices. A few others shared their own feelings of betrayal, stemming from the absence of transparency in their connections. This gathering was not a quest for reconciliation. It was a moment for each individual to confront the truth and choose their own journey forward. After that meeting, I came to understand that this circle of friends had lost its purpose. The cherished memories had transformed into echoes of sorrow and longing. Each couple embarked on their own journey, drifting apart without a farewell. We never crossed paths again, and perhaps that was for the best. I made the courageous decision to end my marriage. The journey of divorce was challenging, yet deep down, I understood it was the right path. My relationship with my wife had reached a point of irreparable damage, and persisting would only bring pain to us both. I chose to leave, taking my children with me, and embarked on the quest to create a new life. I relocated to a new city, embracing a fresh beginning. I secured a new job, purchased a cozy home, and dedicated myself to nurturing my children. Each day presented its own challenges, yet it also offered me the chance to discover my strength and independence. I engaged in community activities, connected with new faces, and slowly but surely, I uncovered a sense of tranquility. My children, despite the challenges of adjusting to a new environment, swiftly embraced their new life. I endeavored to cultivate a nurturing atmosphere for them, one where they could flourish without enduring the burdens of adult missteps. Reflecting on the journey I've traveled, I recognize that betrayal has imparted invaluable lessons. It has deepened my appreciation for the genuine treasures in life, illuminated the truth that not all connections endure, and revealed that sometimes releasing what no longer serves us is the key to progress. The hurt has fortified my spirit, empowering me to understand that I can conquer any obstacle as long as I maintain faith in myself. Years later, as I reflect on the past, the pain has dulled, no longer piercing as it once did. I have shed the anger and bitterness, embracing a sense of relief. My life is uncomplicated now, yet it is a simplicity I have consciously embraced. I have distanced myself from my former circle of friends and my ex-wife. Each has embarked on their own journey, and I find no desire to revisit what once was. I understand that life need not be flawless to embrace joy. The experiences of my past have not only fostered my growth, but have also instilled in me a deep appreciation for what I possess. With the dawn of each new day, I discover a tranquility that I once believed was lost to me forever. Next story. I once viewed my life as a collection of fortunate moments. A reliable job, a warm home in the suburbs, and most importantly, a wife whom I cherished deeply. Each day for me commenced with a few serene moments. The gentle hum of the coffee maker in the kitchen, the soft glow filtering through the living room window, and the sight of her in her delicate nightgown as she strolled down the hall. She embodied the essence of a woman that anyone would desire. Intelligent, captivating, and effortlessly skilled at making others feel at ease. Our paths crossed at a gathering of mutual friends, and in that moment, I was entranced by a single glance. Her allure extended beyond her beauty. It was the confidence and enigma that emanated from her presence. In that bustling room, she maintained an intriguing distance, a quality that drew others and yet kept them at bay. After that unforgettable party, I made a promise to myself that I would never let her slip away. True to my word, just a few months later, we embarked on a meaningful relationship, and only 2 years after that, we exchanged vows. From that moment forward, I knew deep in my heart that I had discovered my soulmate, the perfect counterpart that everyone dreams of finding. Our married life is a serene journey. She is not just a wife, she is the perfect partner. With her nurturing touch, she transforms every corner of our house into a genuine home. The living room radiates order, with pillows perfectly placed on the sofa, while the kitchen is filled with warmth, infused with the delightful aromas of her culinary creations. We often cherish simple yet profound moments, enjoying classic films together on weekends or simply sitting side by side, each lost in a book beneath the soft glow of the table lamp. She embodies the essence of presence. She consistently highlights that every action she takes today is a step toward a brighter tomorrow. This perspective leads her to seldom dwell on the past. When I inquire about her family or the years prior to our meeting, her responses are brief, often accompanied by a wistful smile. I never push her to reveal more, for I understand that everyone carries unspoken stories. My love for her is rooted in the present, and I believe that is what truly counts. Every time I catch a glimpse of her diligently focused in her cozy nook, my heart feels a little lighter. She possesses a unique ability to make everything appear effortless, as if each gesture she makes is crafted to spread tranquility to all those nearby. At times, I find myself pondering how I came to be so fortunate, but as I reflect on the past, certain details stand out vividly. She had no close friends from her earlier years, never maintained connections with anyone from her teenage days. The tales she shared about her history were always succinct, as if she wished to move past them swiftly. I recall her mentioning that her youth was challenging, yet I didn't give it much thought. To me, that only added to her value, for she triumphed over those struggles to become the remarkable woman I cherish. In the early days of our marriage, doubt was a foreign concept. Everything felt flawless, from the tender care she showered upon me, to the beautiful life we crafted together, and the unwavering understanding she offered in every circumstance. She consistently reminded me that I was the greatest fortune she had ever encountered, and I embraced that truth wholeheartedly. Reflecting on the past, I realize I may have been overly certain of the flawless image we had created. Yet, in that moment, I had no cause to doubt it. I cherished her, and I was convinced she cherished me in return, as beautifully simple and deeply meaningful as that. I always believed that my relationship with her was a tale worth celebrating. We were so in sync that those around me frequently remarked on how fortunate I was to have such a wonderful wife. And truly, I embraced that sentiment wholeheartedly in the early years of our marriage. Yet gradually, subtle signs began to emerge, not as a fierce tempest, but like a soft breeze, fleeting yet leaving behind a lingering sense of uncertainty. It all began during a gathering with friends. It was a crisp autumn evening, and we found ourselves in a cozy cafe, the warm glow enveloping us. An old friend, David, unexpectedly appeared. Though years had passed since we last met, our bond remained intact. As I introduced my wife to him, I sensed an unusual shift. David hesitated, his gaze flickering to her as if he were grasping at a distant memory. That fleeting moment captured my attention. He greeted her with a handshake and a polite smile before returning his focus to me. Yet, as the evening unfolded, I couldn't shake the feeling that David was uneasy, occasionally stealing furtive glances at my wife. As we stepped out of the bar, I casually inquired if she had ever known David. She responded gently, saying she didn't recall meeting him. Her tone was steady, yet there was an unusual flicker in her expression. Perhaps it was a hint of defensiveness, or maybe it was merely a trick of my imagination. I didn't dwell on it then, but the memory of David's eyes stayed with me, echoing in my thoughts for days to come. Then one weekend, we ventured into the charming, historic part of town. I was captivated by the narrow streets, the quaint cafes, and the delightful antique shops. However, as we turned a corner, she unexpectedly grasped my arm and suggested we alter our path. I was taken aback, for that was a street I frequented, and I couldn't comprehend her desire to steer clear of it. When I inquired, she simply smiled and shared that the atmosphere there evoked unpleasant memories for her. Not wanting to distress her, we changed our course, yet a sense of unease lingered within me. From that day forward, I began to notice her subtle gestures with greater awareness. On one occasion, I caught her glancing at her phone, and as I drew near, she swiftly locked the screen and placed the device face down on the table. When I inquired, she casually mentioned it was just a work email, nothing of significance. Yet, this was not the first instance of such behavior. I recognized that whenever an unexpected message or call came through, she would invariably tense up. Another day, as I was tidying up a seldom-used drawer in my office, I stumbled upon an old envelope. Inside, I found some personal documents, including a copy of her former ID card. What truly piqued my curiosity was the name on those papers. It was different from the one she currently used. This wasn't merely a case of adopting a new last name after marriage. Her first name had changed as well. I reassured myself that she must have altered her name for some personal reason, yet I couldn't shake the question. Why had she never brought it up? During those long, restless nights, I found myself piecing together the fragments I had previously overlooked. She never spoke of her old friends or family. She mentioned having a challenging youth, yet she never elaborated, simply stating that she wished to forget. I had always assumed this was typical. Who among us is free from unpleasant memories? But now, a sense was dawning within me that she was concealing something deeper. Once, I attempted to inquire about her past in a gentle manner. I mentioned that a colleague of mine had changed his name for legal reasons and asked if she had ever considered doing the same. She glanced at me, offered a slightly awkward smile, and replied that she had never contemplated it. I sensed the unease in her response, but I didn't wish to make her feel uncomfortable, so I gracefully shifted the conversation. Another evening, we were engrossed in a show when her phone lit up. I noticed a shift in her demeanor as she glanced at the screen. In an instant, she rose, grabbed the phone, stepped outside, and gently shut the door behind her. Though I couldn't catch the words exchanged, her tone was soft, nearly a murmur. When she returned, I inquired about the caller. She simply replied it was a misdial. While her explanation seemed plausible, the way her gaze avoided mine lingered in my thoughts. Slowly, a sense of discomfort began to blossom within me. It wasn't a clear suspicion, but rather a subtle intuition that there was an aspect of her past that remained hidden from me. I questioned whether I was overreacting, yet then something else occurred that I couldn't dismiss. Every evening, as she nestled beside me with a book in her hand, I gazed at her and pondered. This woman, this soul I cherished and believed in, was there a truth she was withholding from me? A hidden secret, a fragment of her past that remained a mystery? It felt like a tiny fissure in the flawless reflection of our marriage, expanding ever so slightly, poised for the moment when it might break apart entirely. The suspicion ignited within me like a small flame, initially flickering softly, but soon it roared into an uncontrollable blaze. Each new detail I uncovered served as fuel, intensifying the flames and rendering it impossible for me to reclaim the tranquil married life I once knew. It all began to unfold when I discovered she had a social media account that had remained hidden from me. One evening, as she enjoyed a shower, her phone buzzed on the table. I stole a glance and noticed a notification from an app one had never seen her engage with before. Intrigued, I attempted to access the app, but it prompted me for a password. My discomfort deepened. What was the purpose of such a secretive account? The following morning, as she stepped out of the house, an insatiable curiosity ignited within me. I delved into the vast expanse of the internet, exploring various names and utilizing the clues from the old documents I had unearthed earlier. After hours of unwavering determination, I stumbled upon an ancient account on an online forum. The profile picture, a small and hazy image, held a truth I recognized instantly. The smile captured in that moment was achingly familiar, even though the striking makeup and daring attire rendered her nearly unrecognizable at first glance. That forum was a realm beyond the ordinary. The majority of the content consisted of posts promoting personal services, and her account was one of them. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. She had adopted a different name, yet from the brief description, I recognized that this was no coincidence. It was indeed her. One of the posts left me in awe. It was from just a few years before our paths crossed, hinting at her experience in a high-end service in the city we called home. The post featured other images, unmistakably of her, yet younger, more daring, and entirely distinct from the tender partner I cherished. I sat motionless before the screen, sensing that everything around me was unraveling. A torrent of questions surged through my mind. Why had she never shared this with me? Why had she concealed her past? Was she still entangled in that work? But the nightmare was merely unfolding. One evening, as she lay in slumber, I made the choice to delve deeper into her personal computer. I understood I had breached the sanctity of her privacy, yet the desire to uncover the truth surged within me, overpowering all else. In a concealed folder, I discovered old photos and videos tucked away in a directory labeled "The Past." As I opened them, I discovered they were far from ordinary photos. Many captured her in lavish, yet daring ensembles. Some were taken in opulent hotels, locations I had never imagined she had visited. A few videos even suggested that she not only operated as a high-class escort, but might also have ties to influential figures in this city. The deeper I delved, the more I uncovered that she was entangled in a well-structured network. There were ancient emails exchanged between her and a man she called Mr. B. Within those messages, they conversed about gatherings, finances, and even particular demands from clients. What lingered in my mind was an old video I stumbled upon. In it, she was engaged in conversation with a man I didn't recognize, yet the essence of their dialogue haunted my thoughts long into the night. She expressed a yearning to get out, a deep fatigue from living a life that felt beyond her grasp. Her voice carried a blend of sorrow and resolve. It was the first moment I glimpsed a different facet of her, a woman striving to break free from something far greater than herself. I found myself at a crossroads, unsure of the path ahead. I couldn't reveal the truth I held, yet I couldn't feign ignorance either. Each glance at her felt like a piece of my heart was being wrenched away. She, the woman I once believed to be flawless, carried a history that took me by surprise. In the days that followed, I found myself observing every nuance of her behavior with heightened awareness. I noticed how often she glanced at her phone, her anxiety palpable with each incoming text or call. On one occasion, I caught a brief exchange while she was outside on a call. She said to someone, "I'm over that, don't call me anymore." Those words reverberated in my mind throughout the night. I understood that I needed to face her, yet I felt lost on how to begin. Every piece I discovered resembled a vast puzzle, and I questioned whether I could assemble it all without it crumbling into chaos. As I spread all the pieces of the puzzle across the table, the complete image of the woman I cherished as my wife began to emerge. She, who had once been the heart of my universe, now revealed a strikingly different visage. No longer did I see the loving eyes or the gentle smile. Instead, I confronted a specter from the past, shrouded in secrets and deceptions. Initially, I sought to dismiss what I had witnessed. I reassured myself that it was merely a grand misunderstanding, that the photos, the articles, even the emails failed to capture the complete narrative. Yet, with every attempt to persuade myself, the image of her in those photos sharpened. She appeared younger, more daring, and the expression in those images was not that of a joyful wife. It was the gaze of someone performing a part, someone evading the truth. I recalled every word she had shared about her past, brief and hurried phrases that hinted at a chapter of her life she wished to leave unspoken. While I believed I was honoring her privacy, I was, in truth, allowing her to construct a barrier that separated us. The nights grew denser, wrapping around us like a heavy blanket. I lay beside her, sleep eluding me. I could hear her rhythmic breathing and feel her warmth, yet my thoughts wandered far away. A torrent of questions surged within me, yearning for release. Why? What transpired? And above all, was she truly the person I believed her to be? Yet, each time I summoned the courage to speak, an unseen dread restrained me. I feared losing her, terrified that the truth might shatter everything we had built. Conflicting emotions swirled within me. A part of me yearned to forgive her, to release her past and embrace the present. Yet another part couldn't shake the thought. If she could conceal this from me, what else lay hidden that I remained unaware of? I reflected on her words, the moments of avoidance, and I started to sense that our marriage was not truly founded on trust. One night, as she peacefully slept, I found myself at my desk, captivated by the small box I had discovered a few days prior. Inside lay a notebook filled with a chaotic mix of numbers, names, and addresses. Certain names ignited memories from posts I had encountered on online forums. One address particularly drew my attention. It belonged to an upscale hotel in the city, a destination we had yet to explore together. The following morning, as she stepped out of the house, I made the choice to visit that address. I wasn't certain of what I sought, but I felt an urgent need to take action, to escape the suffocating grip of despair. Upon arriving at the hotel, I settled in the lobby, observing the flow of people, pondering how many times she had crossed that threshold. I couldn't bring myself to inquire, couldn't confront the truth of what I might uncover. That evening, she returned home with a calm demeanor, yet I could see the unease in her eyes. She inquired about my day, and I responded with a vague reply. It dawned on me that we were transforming into two strangers coexisting beneath the same roof. In the days that followed, I found myself enveloped in a state I can only describe as paralysis. I yearned to confront her, to embrace the truth, yet each time I attempted, an unseen fear held me captive. I dreaded that if I faced her, I would be left with nothing. Yet, Deep down, I understood that inaction would allow these doubts to consume me from within. One day, as she prepared a meal in the kitchen, I stood behind her, observing her familiar silhouette, and pondered, could I find it in my heart to forgive? Could love still flourish within me, despite everything I had uncovered? Yet, the memories of the photos, the emails, and the deception she had concealed over the years flooded my mind. I find myself at a crossroads, caught between two powerful choices: to forgive and embrace the journey ahead, or to confront the truth and dismantle everything. Each path presents its own challenges, and I question whether I possess the inner strength to forge ahead. In the days that followed, I found myself caught in a relentless battle between two paths: to persevere or to release. Each time I gazed upon her, a tempest of emotions surged within me like crashing waves. A part of me yearned to embrace the notion that the past was behind us, that the woman she had become, the one I cherished and vowed to love, was separate from the truths I had unearthed. Yet, another part of me couldn't shake the haunting question: if she could conceal this from me, what other mysteries lay hidden in the shadows? One evening, I found myself in solitude within my study, gazing at the small notebook I had discovered in the box. The numbers, names, and addresses appeared to taunt me. I attempted to search online for some of the names, yet much of the information had vanished. A few of the addresses aligned with elegant hotels in the city, establishments she had never alluded to in our discussions. I recalled all the instances when she shied away from discussing the past, the moments when she artfully shifted the conversation, and I started to understand that I had been gently misled. She never spoke a falsehood outright, yet she never revealed the truth either. The uncertainty was the ideal disguise, a snare that I had willingly stepped into because of my love for her. I often find myself reflecting on our marriage. The joyful moments, the adventures we shared, the cozy movie nights, they unfold in slow motion within my thoughts. Yet, each cherished memory now brings with it a lingering question. Were they genuine, or were they merely a part of a performance she enacted? One day, while she was immersed in her work, I made the choice to drive to an address I had found in the book. It was a central apartment, opulent yet somewhat uninviting. I wasn't certain what I was seeking, but I felt an urge to take action. I sat in the car, observing the ebb and flow of people, yet nothing remarkable unfolded. After a few hours, I returned home, feeling more hollow than ever before. That evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, I gazed at her and pondered the possibility of forgiveness. She sat opposite me, her gentle smile and loving eyes still reminiscent of the affection I once cherished. Yet now, those eyes no longer offered the comfort they once did. I realized I was facing a stranger, a person whose depths I no longer comprehended. In the nights that followed, I found myself awake, attuned to her rhythmic breathing beside me. I pondered whether she felt a sense of guilt. Did she realize that I had unearthed the secrets she had concealed? Yet, if she was aware, why did she remain silent? Eventually, I realized that I could no longer contain these emotions within me. One evening, after dinner, I proposed that we take a moment to sit down and converse. I began by expressing my feelings, revealing that there was an unspoken connection between us that had been hidden away. While I didn't share every detail I held, I made it clear enough for her to understand that my trust in her had waned. She remained quiet for a long moment, and then she started to share her truth. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, as she confessed to a past that weighed heavily on her heart. She spoke of being pulled into a life that felt beyond her grasp, those years lingering as a shadow she had longed to leave behind. I sat and absorbed her words, a blend of frustration, sorrow, and compassion swirling within me. She offered no excuses, no justifications, simply sharing the truth of her experience. She expressed that our meeting had marked a pivotal moment in her journey, that I had opened the door for her to begin anew. After she concluded her words, we lingered in silence. It was as if I had just listened to a tale about a stranger, someone entirely unfamiliar to me. Yet, in that moment, I sensed her sincerity, perhaps for the first time in many years. The days that followed became the most challenging of my life. I faced a pivotal decision. Could I embrace forgiveness and nurture this marriage, or was it time to release and embark on a new journey? I spent countless nights in deep contemplation, grappling with my own thoughts. I recognized that she had transformed, that she was no longer the person I once knew. Yet, I also understood that the bond of trust between us had been shattered, and I questioned whether it could ever be mended. In the days that unfolded after that conversation, our home was enveloped in a weighty silence. The spontaneous smiles had vanished, and the warm embraces were nowhere to be found. Each time I gazed at her, I beheld a different woman, someone I cherished profoundly, yet who had also fractured my trust. I came to understand that my decision could not be made in haste. I required time to delve into my emotions, to reflect on the past and the future, and above all, to confront the pivotal question: is this love worth preserving? In the early days, I was enveloped in sorrow and fury. I felt a deep sense of betrayal, not just from her past actions, but from her attempts to conceal them all these years. Each time I reflected on the photos, the posts, and the emails, my heart ached. But then, another part of me began to awaken. I questioned, am I being too severe? She had made efforts to transform, to leave the past behind and embrace a new life. I was the one she selected to embark on this journey with, and wasn't that also something worthy of respect? I chose to pause and reflect deeply. Each evening, I wandered through the quiet streets, seeking clarity in the stillness of the city. I reminisced about all we had experienced together, the joyful moments, the times she nurtured me during my illness, and the dreams we had woven together. Those cherished memories remained etched in my heart, untouched by the painful truths of her past. One afternoon, I chose to confide in a dear friend, the one I trusted above all. He listened intently to my tale, offering no rushed counsel. When I concluded, he simply remarked, "The past does not define a person. It is how they embrace the present and shape the future that truly matters." Those words lingered in my mind for days. I started to understand that, while her past remained unchangeable, the essence of who she was in the present held the greatest significance. I could not overlook the fact that she had genuinely loved me, that she had poured her heart into creating a new beginning, and as the one she had chosen to walk alongside, could I not offer her the opportunity she deserved? One evening, I found myself sitting with her, not to cast blame or seek answers, but to unveil my genuine emotions. I expressed that I was wounded, that I felt a sense of betrayal, yet I recognized the immense effort she had put into being the person I cherished. I was uncertain if we could navigate this challenge, but I was ready to make the attempt. The days that followed were filled with challenges. We began by laying everything bare, sharing truths she had kept hidden and emotions I had never voiced. She opened up about the tough years, the suffering she had faced, and the reasons behind her silence. I came to understand that she had not intentionally deceived me. Rather, she feared that if I uncovered the truth, I would walk away. We made the choice to seek the guidance of a marriage counselor. The sessions illuminated our understanding of each other's emotions and provided a pathway to restore trust. I discovered the power of forgiveness, not just for her, but for myself as well, releasing the grip of anger that had held me captive for so long. As time unfolded, the journey grew lighter. I started to perceive her not merely as a woman with a troubled history, but as a courageous soul who had triumphed over adversity to emerge as a more refined version of herself. I discovered the importance of evaluating her by her present actions rather than the shadows of her past. Our story did not conclude with a miracle. The scars remain, and at times they still ache. Yet, I have embraced them, recognizing them as an integral part of the journey we have chosen to embark on together. Next story. Margaret nestled by the expansive window of her home, the golden afternoon sun pouring through the delicate curtains. She gazed out at the garden, where the rose bushes she lovingly nurtured were bursting with vibrant blooms. It was a serene afternoon, one of those precious moments when she felt utterly at peace. Her family was thriving in harmony. Her husband, Richard, remained the kind and thoughtful man she had always known. Their beloved son, Daniel, had recently wed Sophie, a radiant and spirited young woman who had infused fresh energy into their lives. Margaret beamed with pride for Sophie. Not only did she possess beauty, but her intelligence shone brightly, and she had an extraordinary ability to make everyone in her presence feel at ease. Sophie effortlessly became the heart of family gatherings. Margaret cherished how Sophie had a knack for infusing joy into every moment, from delightful anecdotes to her talent for creating the perfect table setting each weekend. Lately, however, Margaret had sensed an unexplainable shift in the energy of the household. Initially, she dismissed it as a fleeting emotion. Yet subtle, almost imperceptible signs began to emerge, like delicate fissures in an otherwise sturdy wall. One afternoon, as Margaret ventured into the garden to gather some flowers, she stumbled upon Richard and Sophie in a distant corner. Richard was bent slightly, intently listening to Sophie's words. Sophie beamed, leaned closer, and tenderly rested her hand on Richard's arm. Margaret lingered for a few moments, silent and observant from afar. The expression in Richard's eyes unsettled her. It was not the gaze a father-in-law should possess when conversing with his daughter-in-law. There was a profound intensity in it, as if he were captivated by Sophie's very essence. Margaret chose not to approach. Instead, she turned and retreated into the house, yet the haunting image lingered with her throughout the evening. She attempted to cast aside the thought, reassuring herself that she was merely being overly sensitive. Richard and Sophie were likely engaged in an intriguing conversation. Sophie had always possessed a talent for capturing attention, and Richard, with his laid-back demeanor, was probably just being himself. Yet, the persistent unease in Margaret's stomach lingered. It felt like an unusual fragment of the familiar family puzzle, an element that didn't quite fit, leaving her uncertain about the reason why. One evening, as Daniel was away on business, Margaret found herself in her bedroom, striving to immerse herself in the pages of her book. Yet, the joyful laughter from downstairs reverberated through the stillness, pulling her attention away. With a sigh, she set her book aside and ventured downstairs to uncover the source of the merriment. Upon entering the living room, she discovered Richard and Sophie nestled on the sofa, their closeness more pronounced than usual. A bowl of popcorn rested on the table, and the glow from the television illuminated their faces. Sophie erupted in laughter, leaning back with delight, while Richard beamed, his gaze unwaveringly fixed on her. Margaret lingered in the doorway of the living room, sensing that she had stepped into a realm that felt foreign to her. Her mere presence appeared to shift the energy within the space. Sophie subtly repositioned herself, creating a bit more distance from Richard, as Richard grasped the remote control and silenced the television. Though no one met her gaze, Margaret could feel the tension that enveloped the room. She turned and made her way back to her bedroom, yet her thoughts eluded her grasp. The images swirled in her mind, woven together with the memories of the afternoons spent in the garden. Margaret attempted to persuade herself that it might merely be a coincidence, that the emotions stirring within her were not genuine. However, the discomfort nestled in her heart refused to dissipate. It was not a transient sensation that she could simply brush aside. It felt like a subtle shadow encroaching, quietly claiming the luminous corners of her thoughts. In the days that followed, Margaret found herself attuned to the subtleties around her. Each time Richard and Sophie engaged in conversation, an indescribable energy seemed to envelop them. She felt like a reluctant observer, caught in a narrative she wished to avoid yet found herself unable to turn away from. The fleeting glances, the lingering silences, each moment was a fragment of a puzzle, gradually revealing a picture that Margaret feared to confront directly. But Margaret remained silent. Not to Richard, not to Daniel, and certainly not to Sophie. She held everything within, as if voicing her thoughts would summon her deepest fears. Instead, she observed, sensing that she was treading a delicate path between trust and betrayal. In Margaret's mind, a question echoed persistently. Was she caught in a web of overthinking, or was this truly the dawn of a storm she could not escape? In the days that unfolded, Margaret found herself drawn to the intricate details of her family life. Elements that had once seemed insignificant now emerged as curious fragments, each one contributing to a larger picture that ignited her concern. She remained silent, posing no questions, yet the doubt within her heart smoldered like a quiet flame, gradually consuming the tranquility she had once cherished. One bright morning, Margaret found herself at the kitchen table, savoring a warm cup of tea while perusing the news on her iPad. Richard strolled in later than his usual time, soon followed by Sophie. Both radiated a sense of refreshment, yet Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss as she observed Sophie adjusting her hair upon entering the kitchen. It was a subtle movement, yet it seemed to hold a depth of intimacy that eluded Margaret's understanding. Sophie, always the epitome of neatness, now had a lock of hair casually tucked behind her ear, an action that felt almost deliberate, as if she were concealing a secret. Margaret averted her gaze, observing from the periphery, feeling like a stranger in her own sanctuary. Richard poured his coffee and settled beside Sophie, just a chair apart. Margaret sensed an intimacy between them that hadn't existed before. Though their words were unremarkable, the quiet and fleeting exchanges between them stirred a sense within her that something was shifting. That afternoon, Margaret felt a surge of motivation to tidy up the living room, the heart of family gatherings. As she moved the sofa to vacuum, her eyes caught a glimpse of a small object resting on the floor. It was a delicate hairpin, one that did not belong to her. Margaret picked it up and recognized it as Sophie's. This was not surprising. Sophie frequently occupied this chair. Yet, the realization that the clip had been left behind in a space where Sophie only sat with Richard stirred a sense of unease within her. Margaret placed the hairpin in a small drawer in the living room, choosing to keep it a secret. Yet, from that moment forward, she sensed that the home she had once cherished had transformed into a realm of enigmas she was uncertain she wished to unravel. Another day, as Margaret strolled by, she caught a glimpse into Richard's office. The door was slightly open, and Richard's voice floated out, soft yet distinct. Though the words eluded her, there was an unmistakably personal quality to his tone. As she drew nearer, Sophie's voice joined the conversation. It wasn't a mere exchange. It stretched on long enough to stir a sense of unease within Margaret. She didn't linger. Instead, she continued on her way, striving to keep her thoughts in check. Yet, the sensation that she had brushed against something private and sacred remained with her. After dinner that night, Margaret found herself facing another moment that pressed upon her heart. Richard and Sophie lingered in the corner of the kitchen, enveloped in a near silence. With their backs turned to her, they exchanged no words, yet the atmosphere crackled with an unspoken tension. Richard leaned closer to Sophie, his gaze intently exploring her features. Sophie offered a smile, retreating just a bit, but it was not the familiar smile Margaret had cherished from her daughter-in-law. There was a hint of shyness, a touch of uncertainty. Margaret departed in silence, her heart feeling as though it had been tightly compressed. She found herself at a loss, grappling with the weight of what she had witnessed. It wasn't concrete proof, not something she could readily face. Yet, it was sufficient to ignite a tempest within her. The subtle nuances, the glances, the movements, the quietude, appeared to unite in crafting a narrative that Margaret was reluctant to accept. That night, as Margaret lay next to Richard, sleep eluded her. He rested deeply, his breath steady and his expression serene. Yet for Margaret, that serenity had become a mere facade. She gazed at the ceiling, sensing that everything she once held dear was slipping away, piece by piece. Visions of Richard and Sophie danced in her thoughts, rendering it impossible for her to grasp even a fleeting moment of tranquility. Margaret found herself at a crossroads, uncertain of her next step. It felt as though she was treading a delicate path, straddling two realms. The familiar one she cherished, and a mysterious world brimming with secrets that tested her bravery. Yet, within her heart, she recognized that this was merely the dawn of her journey. What she had glimpsed was only the surface, and the true tempest lay just beyond the horizon. Margaret could no longer suppress the emotions swirling within her. The elusive fragments she had attempted to overlook had coalesced into a vivid image that demanded her attention. Yet, she hesitated to leap to conclusions. If it were merely coincidence, it would shatter the very foundations of her beliefs, not only for Richard, but for Sophie and Daniel too. But what if her intuition held truth? The mere thought sent a shiver of fear through her. In the days that followed, Margaret observed everything with a newfound intensity that she had never experienced before. One evening, Richard mentioned he would be home late due to a meeting with a client. His explanation seemed reasonable, yet Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't dressed in his typical business attire. Instead, he opted for a light-colored shirt and comfortable slacks, more fitting for a romantic evening than a professional engagement. As Richard stepped out of the house, Margaret felt a tightening in her heart. There was something in the way he walked out the door that made her feel as though she was on the verge of losing the man she had cherished. Not long after, Sophie stepped out of the house. She mentioned that she was off to meet a friend, yet Margaret couldn't shake the feeling as she observed Sophie in a form-fitting dress and high heels that were seldom seen. These seemingly minor details stirred a sense of unease within her. Determined to uncover the truth, Margaret sprang into action. She swiftly hopped into her car and trailed Sophie. Sophie navigated the bustling streets downtown, arriving at an elegant restaurant. Margaret parked a short distance away, her heart racing as she watched Sophie step through the doors. Moments later, she spotted Richard approaching as well. He appeared unhurried, pausing briefly to straighten his collar before making his entrance. From her vantage point, Margaret observed their meeting in the lobby of the restaurant. Sophie beamed, her eyes sparkling as Richard gently tapped her on the shoulder, and together they ventured inside. Margaret experienced a wave of anguish and disillusionment. All that she had suppressed became vividly apparent. She realized the truth. There existed a connection between Richard and Sophie that she could not bear. Seated in the car, she found herself frozen, her gaze fixed on the restaurant door. Time appeared to halt, and she felt as though she was descending into an abyss with no escape. After a considerable time, Margaret made the choice to depart. She was uncertain of how long she had remained there, but upon returning home, the house felt more desolate than ever before. She entered the living room and took a seat, overwhelmed by the sensation that everything surrounding her was crumbling. Yet this anguish did not defeat her. Rather, it ignited a fire within her to seek further knowledge. Margaret understood that what she had witnessed that evening was merely the beginning, and she was determined to uncover the entire truth. The following morning, Richard and Sophie moved through their routine as if the previous day had never occurred. Richard perused the newspaper in the kitchen while Sophie prepared coffee, just like any other day. Margaret observed them from a distance, silent yet keenly aware. Her eyes captured every movement, every fleeting look exchanged. She understood that what had once enveloped her in warmth now left her feeling chilled. The atmosphere surrounding them was thick with unspoken words, the brief glances and subtle smiles that did not go unnoticed by her. Margaret held her breath until the last of them had stepped out of the house, and then she embarked on her quest for truth. She entered Richard's office, a space he frequently occupied. As she sifted through the contents of his desk drawer, her fingers brushed against a small envelope. Within it lay a receipt from an upscale jewelry store, outlining the purchase of a lavish necklace made just weeks prior. Yet, Margaret had never laid eyes on that necklace. It was not hers, and she needed no one to clarify for her who it was intended for. The sensation of betrayal crashed over her once more, a colossal wave that washed away all she had held dear. Margaret returned the bill, yet her trembling hands struggled to close the drawer immediately. She stepped out of the room, striving to maintain her composure, but the questions echoed relentlessly in her mind. When had Richard transformed? How could Sophie turn against Daniel and her in such a way? Margaret was left with no answers, only the weight of anguish and despair. That evening, as Richard returned home, Margaret perched on the sofa, her gaze fixed on him as if she were seeking the final piece of a grand puzzle. Yet, Richard averted his eyes, offering only a handful of brief words before ascending the stairs. In that moment, Margaret understood that the chasm between them was not merely a collection of minor gestures. It ran deep within the fabric of their relationship, a silent rift that had widened unnoticed. A vision started to take shape in Margaret's mind. She understood that confronting them both at this moment was beyond her reach. Yet, she realized that allowing the situation to persist was not an option. The truth had emerged, and Margaret was aware that the most formidable tempest was still on the horizon. Margaret realized she had to confront the truth, even though it felt daunting. How could she do it? The thought of hurting Daniel weighed heavily on her heart, yet the burden of living a lie had become unbearable. The sleepless nights drained her, both in body and spirit. Each time she gazed at Richard and Sophie, it was as if she were ensnared in a cage, each bar forged from betrayal and heartache. One morning, after Daniel departed for work at dawn, Margaret chose to sit with Richard in their beloved kitchen. Richard appeared to be at ease, even calm, as if every aspect of his life was secure and tranquil. Yet, Margaret perceived the deception in his gaze. They were the eyes of a man concealing a truth, a man who had strayed from the honesty he had vowed to uphold with the one he promised to cherish for eternity. She remained silent. Margaret simply gazed at him, aware that every word was superfluous. Richard, feeling her stare, set his coffee cup down and rose to his feet. He exited the kitchen without uttering a sound, as if intentionally sidestepping a conversation that they both understood could not be evaded indefinitely. Margaret chose not to chase after him. Instead, she turned to her pen and began crafting a letter. Within its lines, there was no accusation or blame. Rather, she poured out the essence of her experiences and emotions. Each word was a poignant revelation, yet Margaret wrote with an unusual serenity. She placed the letter in Richard's desk drawer, confident he would discover it. Then, she embraced the stillness of waiting. The following day, Margaret sensed the weight of the tension the moment Richard stepped into the house. He averted his gaze, uttering not a single word, yet the air between them was so thick that Sophie, upon entering the living room, felt it as well. Sophie set down her bag, her eyes flitting between them, but she refrained from asking anything. Margaret glanced at her, striving to maintain a composed expression, while deep within, her heart was in turmoil. That afternoon, as Margaret and Sophie found themselves alone in the comfort of their home, Margaret resolved to take action without delay. She stepped into the living room where Sophie was immersed in her reading. The gentle light streaming through the window caressed her face, illuminating the youthful beauty that had once captivated Margaret's heart. Yet now, Margaret perceived only a chilling facade that had eluded her understanding until this moment. Margaret settled into the chair across from Sophie, her gaze unwavering and filled with resolve. There were no words exchanged, no gestures made, only a powerful look that spoke volumes. Sophie glanced up, a hint of surprise flickering in her eyes, yet she remained composed. A lengthy silence enveloped them, the two women locked in a moment of understanding, each sensing that a pivotal change was on the horizon. Margaret sought no confession. Her desire was simply for Sophie to understand that she was aware. There was no need for screams or accusations. Her silence became her most powerful tool. Sophie, despite her efforts to maintain her poise, could not conceal the turmoil reflected in her eyes. Margaret noticed her fingers clutching the book tighter, as if it were the sole anchor preventing her from trembling. Margaret rose and approached the window, gazing out at the garden. Behind her, Sophie remained still, a statue of contemplation. The room enveloped them in a profound silence, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Margaret understood that she had indelibly impacted Sophie, a mark that was beyond erasure. It was a mark of the truth they both recognized, yet neither had the courage to voice. Richard returned home late that day, and the air was thick with tension. Margaret sensed that he had read the letter. He averted his gaze, attempting to maintain a facade of normalcy, yet the strain was palpable in every gesture he made. Sophie, seated at the dining table, appeared changed as well. Her words were fewer, lacking the ease she typically exuded. Daniel, unaware of the underlying turmoil, chatted merrily about his work, but Margaret found it impossible to focus. That night, as the world around her drifted into slumber, Margaret found herself in the living room, the soft glow of her desk lamp casting a gentle circle of light. Deep down, she understood that she could not maintain this facade for much longer. The storm had commenced, and she alone held the power to steer its course. Yet, she felt unprepared to shatter the calm just yet. The following morning, Richard departed at dawn. Sophie crafted a reason to leave shortly thereafter. Margaret sensed that everything was unraveling. Yet, rather than succumbing to despair, she recognized that she was gradually reclaiming her power. Margaret understood that the true confrontation was on the horizon, and she was prepared. Margaret sensed she was treading a delicate path where each step could tip her into chaos. The tempest within her had surged to its zenith. In recent weeks, she had observed, persevered, and gathered a wealth of insight. Yet now, the most pressing question loomed. What would be her next move? Margaret had dedicated her life to being a devoted wife, a nurturing mother, and a serene presence. Yet now, she found herself at a pivotal moment where every choice could shatter the world she had carefully crafted. The betrayal struck not just from Richard, but also from Sophie, whom she had cherished as if she were her own daughter. Margaret understood that she was confronting a heart-wrenching reality, while also grappling with the decision of how to move forward. That morning, Margaret embraced her emotions openly. She sat in the kitchen, cradling a cup of tea that had long since lost its warmth, gazing out the window. Richard walked in, his eyes connecting with hers for a fleeting moment before he quickly averted his gaze. The tension in his demeanor was more palpable than ever. Sophie arrived later, moving gracefully with a subtle smile. Margaret observed the unease in the way she shied away from meeting her eyes. But this time, Margaret stood her ground. She met Sophie's gaze directly, silent yet powerful. Sophie faltered for just an instant, but swiftly gathered herself and resumed her tasks as if the world around her remained unchanged. Margaret recognized the veil of anxiety Sophie was attempting to conceal, and it only fueled her resolve that the time had arrived to face the truth. Margaret resolved to break the silence that had lingered for too long. That evening, she summoned Richard and Sophie into the living room after dinner. Daniel had stepped out with friends, leaving the house enveloped in an unusual stillness. Richard settled onto the sofa, while Sophie chose a seat further from him than she typically would. Margaret positioned herself in the center of the room, her eyes fixed on them with unwavering resolve. She chose not to start with accusations or reproaches. Rather, she painted a vivid picture of what she had witnessed. The lingering glances, the tender gestures, and ultimately the rendezvous at the restaurant. Her voice remained steady, yet each word pierced the air with precision. Richard lowered his gaze, offering no response. Sophie remained quiet, her hands gently intertwined in her lap. No one spoke up or defended their actions, and their silence only served to affirm the undeniable truth. Margaret pressed on, this time pouring forth her own emotions. She articulated the anguish of witnessing betrayal from the two individuals she held dearest. Her disillusionment with Richard, the partner with whom she had woven nearly 3 decades of her life, and her resentment towards Sophie, the woman she had embraced as a daughter. She did not raise her voice, did not shed tears, but allowed the pain to flow through her words. Yet it was her serene demeanor that cast a weight upon the room, with moments stretching into what felt like hours. Richard finally found his voice, yet all that escaped his lips were a string of apologies, devoid of explanation or justification. Margaret remained unfazed. She understood that no words could mend the ache within her heart. Sophie stood in silence, her complexion ashen. Margaret chose not to press her for words, but the weight of her gaze rendered Sophie unable to lift her head. Having expressed all that weighed on her heart, Margaret departed from the living room, leaving Richard and Sophie enveloped in a profound silence. She stepped into the garden, where the rose bushes continued to flourish under the gentle glow of moonlight. Yet to her, their exquisite beauty merely accentuated the void within her soul. That night, Margaret found herself wide awake in bed, grappling with a decision that weighed heavily on her heart. The thought of divorcing Richard loomed large, threatening to shatter her family and inflict pain on Daniel, an outcome she simply could not endure. Yet, the idea of continuing to live as if nothing had transpired filled her with a deep sense of regret that she knew she could never escape. She felt caught in a profound struggle between two paths: to remain in the relationship for the sake of her family, or to bravely step away in search of her own peace. The following morning, Margaret carefully gathered her belongings into a small suitcase. She chose not to inform anyone, leaving only a letter on the kitchen table. In that letter, she expressed her need for time to reflect and rediscover herself. Uncertain of her destination or the duration of her absence, she understood that stepping away from this place was essential for her to gain clarity. As she stepped out of the house, Margaret felt a sense of lightness, yet the ache lingered. Uncertain of what the future would bring, she embraced the fact that she had chosen to take a step for herself, a remarkable first in many years. She carried little with her, just a modest suitcase filled with essentials for a few days. Margaret was uncertain of her destination. All she understood was her need for space to reflect, a distance great enough to gain clarity on everything she had just endured. The car glided slowly through the familiar streets, each corner echoing with cherished memories of her family. Margaret chose not to turn on the radio. Instead, she embraced the hum of the engine, feeling it was the sole sound that anchored her to reality. A whirlwind of chaotic emotions still danced within her, yet she recognized that departing was the right choice. Remaining would only ensnare her in a cycle of pain and deception. Margaret discovered a quaint coastal town, a serene haven, far removed from the clamor of daily life. She rented a cozy house with a view of the sea, where she could spend hours immersed in the soothing rhythm of the waves. In those initial days, Margaret dedicated her time to contemplation. She allowed herself to confront all the emotions she had bottled up over the preceding weeks. The pain, the anger, the frustration, she let them all pour forth, unrestrained and free. She also embraced moments of reflection in her life. Margaret came to understand that throughout the years, she had lost touch with her true self. She had consistently prioritized her family, setting aside her own dreams and desires to maintain harmony. Yet now, with that family in disarray, Margaret found herself at a crossroads, compelled to reconstruct her identity from the fragments. During Margaret's absence, Richard reached out to her multiple times. His messages overflowed with heartfelt apologies, deep remorse, and a sincere wish to mend their bond. In one of his messages, Richard revealed to Margaret that he had become entangled in a relationship with Sophie while feeling a disconnect from her. Yet he acknowledged that this did not excuse his betrayal. Sophie sent a message as well, though it was more concise. She offered no excuses or justifications. Instead, Sophie conveyed her remorse and mentioned that she was stepping out, allowing Margaret the space and time to determine what felt right. Margaret absorbed every word, yet she chose not to reply right away. She understood the importance of allowing herself the space to reflect, seeking clarity and calmness in her thoughts, rather than reacting impulsively to fleeting feelings. One evening, Margaret received a call from Daniel. Concerned for her well-being, he expressed his confusion over her sudden absence. Margaret took a deep breath, striving to keep her voice steady as she explained that she needed some time to reflect. Daniel refrained from probing further, yet Margaret sensed his unease. He remained unaware of the turmoil between Richard and Sophie, and Margaret grappled with the dilemma of whether to reveal the truth to her son. This internal conflict weighed heavily on her, but she understood the importance of taking the time necessary to arrive at the right decision. The days spent in the small town illuminated a profound realization for Margaret. She could not control every aspect of her life. She could not compel Richard to change, nor could she erase the hurt caused by his betrayal alongside Sophie. However, she held the power to determine how she would confront the truth and the choices that lay ahead. Margaret found herself at a crossroads, uncertain if she could extend forgiveness to Richard, and unsure of the future of his relationship with Sophie. Yet, deep within her, she recognized that her life was not intertwined with theirs. She held the power to craft a new chapter, one that would be free from the weight of others' expectations and pressures. One morning, as the sun poured its golden light through the window, Margaret found herself standing by the sea, embracing the refreshing breeze that danced across her face. Uncertain of whether she would return to that house or embark on a new journey, she felt a profound sense of strength rekindled within her. Margaret understood that the path ahead was still lengthy and filled with twists and turns. Yet for the first time in years, she sensed the empowering ability to choose her direction.